11, Mind and Body, Part 5. So we were looking at our Greek forms and our African forms, and now we're going to get into Asia. So the ideal body, excuse me, in Asian culture, this is India, Southeast Asia. So this body was soft and not strong musculature, as you see, and it gives the impression of living flesh. Excuse me. And so this is the Harappan civilization. Um, we believe this to be a Hindu or yogic figure, and it's a youthful deity. And this suggests yogic breathing here, this inward and outward breath. If you remember, uh, Hinduism and Judaism are two of the oldest extant religions. Another one that you probably never heard of is Zoroastrianism, that comes out of Persia. That still exists, but it's very, very small. But Hinduism and Judaism are much older than any of the other religions that are on Earth. Okay, so this is from 3000 BC, so we're thinking at time of the Egyptians. But this religion is ongoing in a different area in the world. But we don't have as much visible evidence from this time period. So we can compare these different idealizations. I know they look very different, but remember, these are idealized from their particular culture. So we have Asia, which is India. We have Greece, which is the Mediterranean and the beginnings of Europe. And then we have Africa here. Another piece we're going to look at from India is a yakshi. Now, yakshis are shown in a lot of sculpture, mostly in religious structures. This particular one is a Buddhist stupa. And although she's not exactly part of Buddhism specifically, there's a lot of crossover in the 1st century BC and even a little further into Buddhist art. But she is more of a native Indian goddess. Fertility is her focus. Remember, fertility is really important. Especially 3,000, 4,000 years ago, when things are very insecure about weather and crops and all that stuff, and then, childbirth, there's no hospitals, you have to think about those things. So the idea of having a female figure that was fertile, that was an important, powerful piece. So her breasts are exaggerated to emphasize her powers, and I think we know that in our commercial world today in advertising, that's somewhat true, or that exaggerates a woman's power. But in reality, what it's connecting to is fertility, which maybe is confusing in our day and age. Anyway, when she touches a tree, it flowers and bears fruit. In Persia, this is a little lesser expanded body of art. There's not a lot of this work that exists, but the idea that youthfulness, these emperors would look very youthful. Okay, that was important. And then we're getting away from the nudes because this is a more this is Islamic culture and it's more conservative, and you're completely clothed and you don't even show your hair at times or things like that. Also, we are dealing with, in all honesty, a cooler climate, so there could be some crossover with that perception. Okay, so with Greek sculpture or just with Greek art in general, we have the Archaic period, we have the Classical period with that Doryphorus that we looked at, and we have what is called the Hellenic period. Okay, if you think of Helen of Troy, that is the Hellenic period, and this is a depiction of Laocoon and his sons, and you see a lot more musculature and struggle. He's not just standing still or holding a pose. He is struggling. It's depicting an actual, well, a mythological, we could say, event. We don't know how the reality of this, like many things of in the ancient world, but he's a Trojan, and the Greeks and Trojans are battling, and the gods decide to side with the Greeks, and they send a serpent to attack him while he is actually at a temple praying. But we see a lot more action, and musculature is really, I mean, look at that. That vein is even there. That's tremendous. It's carved into stone here. Tremendous. And two things we're looking at here that are the embodiment of Stoicism and Epicureanism. So Epicureanism means something different in modern day. It kind of means that you're a picky eater, that you like to eat gourmet food. But in this case, it says advocating intelligent pleasure, seeking in life because death is the end of existence. So it kind of, you can see where the meaning has changed, but the idea that you would seek amazing food and you would seek higher thought and all that stuff because you're not going to be reborn and you're not going to heaven. There's no heaven, no hell. So those are some schools of thought there, that you're going to live life to the fullest in this life, and that Stoicism's that you are urged to endure your fate, and then you're just resigned to accept your role. So he's accepting death here with his sons. Now we're skipping 1100 years later in France, going north and west. This is the Middle Ages, otherwise known as medieval times. And medieval Europe, we've gotten away from the classical Greek and Roman sculptures and the idealized body and form, and we've gotten more into Christianity and faith and putting our hands into a God and things are unknown. So the idea of the divine realm and the natural realm, sin and corruption happen in the natural world. None of these things happen in the divine realm. And we want to embody the divine realm so we don't depict things realistically from earth, if that makes sense. So we're going to show gods that sort of float. The feet are not going to touch the ground, and the reality of the figures is not going to be important here. So these are not, I wouldn't call them stick figures, but they're certainly abstracted and strange. But they're not. It's not important that they look realistic, if that makes sense. So idealized Greek nude is not conceived of at this time because it's 1100 years different or later. Okay, so the Renaissance, which happens about 300 years after this, is a return to the idealization of the Greek form, if that makes sense. Renaissance means rebirth. Okay, so it's a rebirth of the Greco-Roman ideals. And we're going to look at the statue of David. David is one of the all-time most famous statues that's ever been sculpted. This is Michelangelo at his finest. And he believed the human form was the most perfect and important subject to depict. And we've looked at some different sculptures of his as well. And David is from the story from the Bible of David and Goliath. Okay, so it's a little confusing here. Biblical story, Greco-Roman influence. What humanism is, it's celebrating the glory of humanity as well as maintaining the Christian beliefs. So by Christian, we mean Catholic still at this point. The Reformation hasn't happened. Protestants have not happened. But at any rate, we are depicting some biblical themes, but we are depicting them in a Greek or Roman idealization. And if you look at our David in comparison to our Doryphoros back here, you can see a lot of similarities. Look how there's sort of like that tree down here, and the musculature is here is realistic. But David goes probably even up a little further than that and really gets into some finer details, like all the little smaller muscles, the veins in the neck. So he's just a tremendous statue and idealized, and nudity was okay again. Now, there was a little bit of nudity in the medieval and early Renaissance that had to do with Adam and Eve, because we know that those, through the Bible, those figures were nude, and so that was okay, but no one else in the Bible or anything else, non-biblical subjects, could be portrayed as nude. The human form was not what was important, but the Renaissance brings back this ideal. Okay, we're going to go to our next PowerPoint, see if I can do this. So, this isn't the best comparison. There's a better one I have in another book, but you can see a figure that's sort of floating and elongated. You can kind of see this figure down here, not very well, but you can see how they're kind of elongated. The head is probably there's probably 10 heads within the body, and the ideal is to do 8 heads within the body. You measure it that way. So this is a very different way to compare different way to look at medieval work compared to Renaissance. The Renaissance is a return or a rebirth. Okay?